Hello, and welcome to Stuart Saturday Live, Season 2, Episode 11. I'm your hostess, Andrea Zuvich, the 17th Century Lady. Thanks to Dr. Erica Canella for joining me last month to talk about radical early Quakers, the subject of her recently released book, Zealous. Erica and I collaborated on the first Stuart History Festival, which was a great success back in July. A few weeks ago, I met up with the third of our trio, historian Mark Turnbull. We're in the early stages of planning the next Stuart History Festival, so our families met up in York recently. For those of you who follow us on X, you might have caught the short Stuart Saturday Live from within York Minster. This was quite impromptu, but we had fun. And it was fun to catch up with Mark. And for those watching, here's a photo of him in the Merchant Adventurers Hall in York. And he's amongst this, he's with this table. It's a beautiful round wooden 17th century table with intricate chairs. Now, this place is amazing. It has so many artifacts. You can see some of the artifacts in the cabinet on the right of the picture there. And they have loads of 17th century items. So it was beautiful, really lovely. The place was amazing and we recommend a visit. Well, our guest today to talk about her recently released book, Charles II's Portuguese Queen, The Legacy of Catherine of Braganza, is historian Susan Abernethy, whose passion for history dates back some 50 years and led her to study for a Bachelor of Arts degree in history at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. She is currently a member of the Rocky Mountain Medieval and Renaissance Association, the Society for Renaissance Studies, the Historical Writers Association, and the Historical Association. Her work has appeared on several historical websites and in magazines, and includes guest appearances on historical podcasts. Her blog, The Freelance History Writer, has continuously published over 500 historical articles since 2012, with an emphasis on European, Tudor, medieval, Renaissance, early modern, and women's history. Joining us live from Colorado, USA, please welcome Susan Abernethy.
Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome. It's such a pleasure to see you again and a thrill to have you join me in my salon today.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yay. You and I go back a fair bit. We've known each other for what? Maybe 15 years? Maybe around or
Something like
more?
that. Yep.
Yeah. Um, I'll show some people some of the a photo of us from Carpenter's Arms in
Yes.
Windsor. And shortly, yes, there we are. We were meeting a mutual friend, and this pub is only a few steps away from Windsor Castle. And we had a lovely time, didn't we? We had a
We
lovely chat,
did.
history, and a good meal, I think, if I recall. It was a nice traditional pub. Um, have you been to the UK since then?
I have. Um,
Yes.
Mostly visiting Scotland. Been to
Oh, nice.
Scotland a couple of times. Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, my sister just went there 2 months ago, so it's a popular destination. So, what parts did you most enjoy? Seeing?
Um, oh, I One of my missions was to visit all of the graves of King Henry VIII's wives. So I did. I've managed to do that now.
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. So I was really happy to
Oh,
visit like Studley Castle, where
y-
Catherine Parr is buried. I've been to Westminster Abbey several times and also to the
mhm,
National Portrait Gallery in London. Um,
yeah.
yeah, and any kind of medieval castle, I'm there.
Lovely. Oh, I have to say, you have a beautiful background. Look at all those books. That is really nice. Oh, wow. So I'm wondering, are you as much of a bibliophile as it appears?
I would say that once I learned to read in the first grade, I've been reading a book ever since.
Oh,
So,
that's amazing.
And even
Wow.
when I was working full time, I would always have a book on my nightstand and read history and biography. So, yeah, it's my library, and I don't know what I would do without it. I need it for my research,
Mhm.
um, for writing my books. So,
Oh, it's just beautiful. I really love that. I always like to see books. You don't see most of my books on this shelf, but behind me. So I have it angled, but I love that. That's beautiful backdrop. Um, yeah. So I was wondering, you were talking about how you love reading and you've always had a history book or something on your night table. Could you tell us more about your background? Like what first got you interested in history?
well, I would say that before I, you know, like I said, when I was reading, I would go to the library
Hmm.
and I found the books of Jean Plady.
Oh,
The
yes.
woman, yeah, named Eleanor Hibbert, and she wrote a
Uh-huh.
lot of historical fiction about British history. And she was actually fairly accurate when I look back on it now. And um, she really wrote sparkling dialogue. So they were fun to read. And I actually
Mhm.
did read a book of hers called The Merry Monarch's Wife, and this was about Catherine of Braganza. But
Ah,
the big turning point for me was when they had the TV show, The Six Wives of Henry VIII in 1971. And
mhm.
I just was astounded that there was a king that married six times and cut the head off of two of his wives. That was,
Yeah.
I'm not just shocking, but to me, it was like better than fiction. So I started reading everything I could get my hands on about Tudor history, um, fiction and nonfiction. So that's kind of where it started. And that's when I decided that I was going to study history in college.
Right. Well, lovely. Um, I'm always interested in knowing how, what first sparked someone's interest in history. And it's lovely to hear all these different avenues towards this study, this lifelong love and appreciation. Um, so, would you please tell us more about your work on the freelance history writer? I mean, some what 500 articles. That's amazing. Your
Mhm.
enthusiasm for all things historical is very clear and infectious. So I'd love to learn, hear more.
Yeah, I just, a friend of mine from high school, she had started a women's history blog, and she put a little blurb out on her Facebook page and said, I need some help. I need someone to write with me on this blog. And so I started writing for her. Um, and one of my first articles was on Emma of Normandy, who was a medieval queen that married two kings of England. And I wrote this article, and man, people loved it. They were sharing it, and I was getting all these
Yeah.
likes, and I was like, well, maybe I can write, maybe I can do this. And
Yes.
so I wrote a few things for her blog, and then I decided I was going to start my own because I wanted to write not just about the women, but the men too. And and one of my goals was to have articles about all the queens of England on the blog. And
Right.
one of the first queens that I looked into was Catherine. And I
Mm.
can't even tell you why, but I thought she was interesting. And
Yeah.
when I was doing my research, I was like, I couldn't find a lot of information in English.
Mm.
And it turned out that the biographies of her were from 1915 and 1934.
Wow.
And so the English biographies, I should say. And so I
Right.
thought, I think that she needs to have a spotlight put on her. And there's been a lot of academic scholarship about queenship, like what is the
Mhm.
job of a queen.
Right.
And, um, I just wanted to update her and update that information about her.
Right. Yeah, she's I think most people who are acquainted with this history of the 1660s and onwards, they see her as a peripheral figure, and she was very much um, she had a lot to deal with in her role as queen and wife, and it was a very difficult time for her, this whole situation. But we'll get into that a bit more later. But what what about her intrigued you and made you want to write about her story?
Well, it, it's very interesting to me that she's the only Portuguese queen of England.
Mm-hmm.
It's-
That is quite
So
something.
she's a
Yeah.
rarity. And I didn't really know anything about Portuguese history. So when I first started doing my research, I read, a dozen or more books about Portuguese history. And it
Mhm.
turned out that England and Portugal had a long relationship starting back to the 14th century, maybe even before that. So, um,
Yes.
yeah, it's kind of peripheral
Um,
history to the British history, is the relationship between Portugal and England.
and I found that very refreshing, and I really enjoyed it. See, I have a copy of your book here, um, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I like that you spent so much time talking about Portuguese and English history, and how it was sort of interwoven together for some time. And I think many people who are into the Stuart history genre, they probably don't know as much about Portuguese history as we would like. Um, and it was fascinating, and you did spend time talking about these connections, and how she just didn't come out of nowhere to marry Charles II. So I thought that was fascinating. And also that her marriage to Charles II wasn't like the only subject of your book. I mean, she had a much fuller life. I mean, she had her widowhood as well. I mean, there was a great deal of time as well. So you were able to look at the entirety of her life, which I thought was amazing. I've never seen it done to such an in-depth level. And so I commend you. It's really nice. I love the cover too. Beautiful. I'd never seen this portrait of Catherine before.
That that is a
And
very interesting portrait because that is it's been altered a little bit, but
mhm,
there's a portrait of her, a huge portrait in the monastery of St. Vincent de Fora in Lisbon, and that's where she's buried with the rest of her family. And that portrait is in that monastery. That's probably why you haven't seen it unless you've been
right.
to Lisbon. But
No, I've
I
never
think,
been. Yeah.
yeah, I think that she is gorgeous in that portrait.
Mhm.
The clothing she has, her hair is done tastefully, and
Yeah.
one of her attributes was her eyes, and her eyes are just beautiful in that portrait.
Yes. Yes, it is quite a striking portrait. Um, so could we talk about her parents? I mean, who were they, please?
Mm-hmm.
And could you talk to us about John the Fourth and Maria Luisa Francisca de Guzman,
The Guzmans,
maybe?
yes. Um, this is what another parallel that I really like about the Stuarts and the Braganza dynasty is that they both had been recently restored. So, of course, the Stuarts were restored in 1660, but
Yes.
in 1580, King Philip II of Spain pretty much came into Portugal and had a bloodless coup and took over Portugal. They had been independent before that. And so the Spanish ruled Spain or Portugal from 1580 to 1640. And there was kind of a rebellion. It wasn't a terrible riotous revolution, but there was a rebellion in Portugal, and they decided to name John, the eighth Duke of Braganza, as their king. And his family went back to the 14th century. King John the First and Philippa of Lancaster, who was the daughter of John of Gaunt,
Mm-hmm.
um, had all these children, and John had a mistress, and he made that son the Duke of Braganza. So her father was a descendant of that king, and so
Wow.
he had a good claim to the throne. So in 1640, he became King John IV. Now he had married Maria Luisa, um, before that because the person that was running the country for Spain arranged this marriage for John.
Mm-hmm.
And she was, as Francis Gribble, who was this historian of the Braganza family, called it, she wore the pants in the family.
Oh.
she was
Wow.
very dominant in the relationship. And
Mhm.
so, and she ended up being regent for the two of her sons once her husband died. And so I think
Oh,
she had a huge influence on Catherine. And I think that's where she got her resilience from, was from her mother.
wow. That's a very interesting background. Um, so what kind of upbringing did Catherine have in Portugal?
Well, her mother was very strict, and she wanted Catherine to grow up and have a convent education. Now, we
Mm,
don't know if she went to the convent periodically or if the nuns came to the palace or if it was some kind of combination, but she basically was taught by the nuns, and she wasn't given any kind of education in how to cultivate followers or any kind of politics. I think that Louisa Maria wanted her to be, you know, a passive wife,
I see.
and so that's why she wasn't given any kind of political education. But she
Unlike
also,
herself.
yeah, she
Like,
also
yeah.
kind of bordered on mysticism because, she was in the convent all the time around the nuns, and she just was
Mhm.
very religious. The Portuguese are quite religious, so that's how she grew up.
Right. I think we have an image of the convent you mentioned.
Yes, in my
Maybe we could
research,
see that.
yeah, it looked like this might be the convent because it was built in
Ah,
1620, the convent of the Holy Sacrament,
mhm.
in Alcantara, which is in Lisbon now, but was,
Right.
not part of Lisbon back then. But
Mhm.
and it was for noble women, mostly noble women. They would retire there, and so I believe this is where she got her schooling.
I see. And I noticed that one of your chapters is entitled "Sunny Portugal," and from this image, it certainly looks sunny. So it. Did you I assume you've visited Portugal
I
and
was I
well,
was supposed to go to Portugal in March of 2020,
oh, okay.
and the trip got canceled because of
Oh, I'm
COVID.
sorry.
I
Oh,
know. I would wanted to
but
have pictures for the book and everything, but my plan is to go next year. So
well, that'd be brilliant because I think as well your book has been translated into Portuguese, hasn't it?
it will be translated into
Oh,
Portuguese and
it will
probably,
be.
yes, and probably will be released January of 2027. So I
That
am
is so
very
cool.
pleased.
Yay! Well, congratulations. That is
Thank you.
amazing, and that's perfect. That's as it should be. Yeah, in English and in Portuguese. That's perfect. Um, well, you did say in your book that in the introduction, I believe, that there was a biography of Catherine in Portuguese that has yet to be translated into English. So how do you navigate hurdles like this? I mean, were you able to use it as a source nevertheless, or or what?
I love the internet because you can go on several websites, but one that I really like to use is bookfinder.com, and you can get
Oh,
books in any language anywhere in the world. And I actually found a first edition 1941 copy of Virginia Rao's biography of Catherine. And I felt like this would be an important source because um, when I was reading about her in English, they would have a few paragraphs about her childhood, and then, a few paragraphs about when she went back and was regent of Portugal. And I'm like, this isn't enough information. I need more. So I
yeah.
actually purchased this book, and I put out a call on LinkedIn and asked if anybody could translate it for me. And I found a
Oh,
young man in Portugal, and he was great. I had him translate like the first chapters of her childhood, and then the later chapters of when she was in regent in Portugal. So I did
mhm,
manage to get that information. And I know that there's
good.
been many other biographies of her or stories about her in Portuguese, but
Mhm.
this one I felt like would be a good scholarly biography.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. That's so good. Um, well, moving from her childhood and her upbringing, her education, what do we know about Catherine's feelings about moving to England and marrying King Charles II?
Well, Catherine would have been, you know, her main concern would have been the reputation of Portugal.
Mm.
And so she wanted to be sure that the country would not be embarrassed by her. And also, they exchanged letters. Charles, Catherine, and her mother exchanged several letters in Spanish before she arrived in England. And I think that she was already in love with him just from reading the letters.
Wow.
She probably had kind of a romantic heart. And
Yes, I
so,
think so. I found that as well. Yeah.
yeah. So she would have, she would have wanted to put on a good show for Portugal.
Mm-hmm. Right. Um, well, he wasn't a cold sort of fellow usually when it came to the ladies, and so many fell for his charms, to say the least.
Yes, I think
um,
she did. She absolutely fell for the charm, and I
yes,
think that Charles was charmed by her too because,
yes, I think
yeah,
so.
she was so loyal to him and
Mm-hmm.
so in love with him, and everybody knew this. It wasn't a secret,
No,
so it was reciprocal, and he respected her.
yes. And later on, when things became very difficult, and Catherine um, had been placed in a situation where she was seen as an enemy by some, for political or dynastic purposes, reasons. He stayed by her. I mean, he wasn't a faithful person. He was never a faithful husband, but he didn't discard her later on. So I thought that was very interesting. So he was quite fond of her.
Yes, I have to
Um,
give him a great deal of credit for that too. So,
yeah. Um, So we often hear of the bounteous dowry that Catherine of Braganza would bring to the Stuarts. But, you mentioned about it being good for Portugal. But what else was in it for her? I mean, was it just the greatness of this alliance, perhaps?
yes, I think that was probably the most important thing because uh, even after Portugal declared their independence and named their king, Spain went to war with them and tried to gain Portugal back. And so
Mm,
Catherine's mother was in need of allies and also soldiers and money to fight the Spanish. So this would have been one of the key reasons for the treaty was to back up Portugal, and help them in the war against Spain.
right,
Um, this is probably the biggest thing. And she would have been proud to represent her country. She
right,
definitely was. She considered it a personal sacrifice um, to marry the king. So,
right. I see. Um, Thank you. Well, during the course of my research for Barbara Villers,
mhm.
um, I found myself becoming really, really fond of Catherine of Braganza, and that's sometimes difficult when you're writing about somebody else. And I felt I felt very much drawn to her as well, um, because Catherine certainly didn't have it easy. Her situation was very unenviable. She came to this country, to England, um, and as it transpired, she sort of was seen by Barbara, who was the king's mistress for about 2 years by that point, as the other woman. So usually, when we talk about husbands being unfaithful to their wives, they're usually married to a woman and then they have their extramarital affairs. But in this case, Charles was not married, and he was with a married woman, Barbara. And so they had at least two children, or she was going to be pregnant. She was pregnant and she was going to have a child by the time of the honeymoon of Charles and Catherine. So it's a very complex situation and very unenviable for Catherine as a bride to be thrust into this position where there was this woman who was in effect the de facto queen. She was very powerful, this Barbara, very beautiful, very manipulative, and out to get things her way. And of course, Catherine seemed very much this innocent and uh, someone who's already had fallen in love with her husband, which is a lovely thing, but given this situation, it proves very difficult. What do you think she felt when she realized how involved Charles was with Barbara Villas?
Well, we have a really good example of what she felt. Charles brought Barbara into a little gathering that Catherine was holding and introduced her to Catherine. And Catherine, she didn't want to have anything to do with Barbara. She probably knew all about her by that time. But when he surprised her in this drawing room with the mistress, Catherine fainted and had a nosebleed. So this is what she thought of the king's mistress. And then when Barbara was wanting to be a part of Catherine's household, it was up to the queen to choose who was in her household, not the king. But Charles tried to force Barbara on her, and Catherine was livid. She was just livid. She did not want this woman in her household. And she pitched a fit. She threatened to return to Lisbon. Um, she cried, she yelled, she got angry. Um, what happened was Charles ended up taking away all of her Portuguese servants except for one older woman and some priests that she brought with her. And people at court started to shun her. So this was serious. And I think that Catherine, you know, was probably astounded that she would be treated this way.
Yes, I mean, it was a kind of insolence, and she wasn't going to bear that. And she entreated Clarendon to fight her corner on the matter. And to his credit, he did the best he could, chastising this wayward king for what he called the hard-heartedness and cruelty in laying such a command upon the queen. Charles was on the receiving end of a lot of Barbara's fury, because that was her personality. If she wanted something and she wanted to be the first lady of the bedchamber, she wanted to make sure he knew that that was what she wanted. And whenever she wanted something, she was determined to get that. Because in another way, she was really trying to have this position because she wanted to sort of cement her power, to show that she was still the boss around here in his heart. So the king found himself in this unfortunate situation, and I have a little excerpt from a letter that he wrote to Clarendon. He wrote, "I wish I may be unhappy in this world and in the world to come, if I fail in the least degree of what I have resolved, which is of making my Lady Castlemaine of my wife's bedchamber. I am resolved to go through with this matter, let what will come on it. Therefore, if you desire to have the continuance of my friendship, meddle no more with this business, and whosoever I find to be my Lady Castlemaine's enemy in this matter, I do promise, upon my word, to be his enemy as long as I live." So that says it already. He was just going to push for that, and as for Catherine, Charles became brutally cold to her, from what we know. But she kept her position. But in time, this continued cruelty became unbearable to her because she was such a warm person. She was so loving, especially having this treatment from someone she loved. Um, so I'm assuming, I think that it's what we call reverse psychology now, where she endeavored to be kindly towards Barbara and was, quote, merry with her in public, and in private used nobody more friendly. But the people who had initially supported her, uh, Catherine's side, um, started to think she was of weak character when they had previously thought she was strong and righteous. So that sort of backfired. And unfortunately for Catherine, Barbara was made the First Lady of the Bedchamber. So a very
Well,
sad situation.
I think that right when there was kind of an impasse in the
Mm-hmm.
crisis, um, Henrietta Maria, Charles's mother,
Mm.
came over for a visit from France. And
Mm.
Henrietta Maria and also Catherine's mother both were the ones that pushed for the marriage between these two. And so they were pretty much, they were on Catherine's side. And when Henrietta was there, she spent a lot of time with Catherine.
Mm.
Um, they went to mass together. They had hours of talking. There's a description of Henrietta Maria holding Catherine's hand and telling her about how beautiful she is. And Henrietta Maria was the daughter of King Henri IV of France. And we all know he was one of those that had official mistresses. And so
Yeah.
I think that
Mm.
Henrietta Maria was, like, look, this is the way it is. You know, these men are going to have their mistresses, and you need to concentrate on having a child and let this go. And so I think that it shows that Catherine was pretty strong to have the wherewithal to go ahead and accept the mistress. And she was always going to have critics, you know, to say
Yeah.
that she was weak. But really that was a strong thing to do, was to just go ahead and accept her. And she may have acted as her friend, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that she took solace in the fact that she was the queen and Barbara was the servant. So
Yes,
that's kind of,
that's a very good point. Yes,
yeah, that's
I
how she
agree.
dealt with it.
Um, yeah, because no matter how much Barbara thought of her own position, it did not last, and Catherine's lasted a lot longer.
Hmm.
So there is that. Um, it's a very interesting thing to think about. Um, Catherine is known to have undergone a change in her sartorial choices. Um, what, what would you please tell us, like, what her style was and what it became and all the stuff about that, please?
One thing that I found really interesting was I found a reference that once Catherine, the treaty had been signed and she knew she was going to England, that she knew that the English women wore high heels. And so she was practicing how to walk in high heels in
Wow.
Portugal before she came to England. And also, Charles had sent her some wardrobe items that were, English style. And when she landed in Portsmouth, she wore these English clothes. So she gave up on the farthingales and the big hair and that kind of thing that she had in Portugal. She gave that up and she tried to dress like the women. One thing that was really kind of cute is both Catherine and her mother were considered to have beautiful ankles. And so Catherine would wear clothing that would show off her ankles. So I'm thinking that the dresses were a little shorter, like, mid shin or something, so people could see her ankles. Another thing that she brought to court was um, an Iberian fan. And the women would use this to shade their pale complexions when they were outdoors. Before this, they wore masks, but after she introduced these fans, they started using the fans and gave up on the masks. So these are a couple of things that she did for
Oh,
fashion.
yes. She brought a few things in that became fashionable, didn't she?
She
Um,
did.
yeah.
I love that
Um,
picture you had of the Merchants Hall in Yorkshire, because
oh, yes.
those were cane chairs in that room. And that's one of the
Yes.
things that Catherine brought with her, because the Portuguese had exported cane to Europe.
Hmm.
And so before this, the chairs were like really heavy and bulky and made out of
Yes.
walnut. And
Hmm.
the Portuguese had a tool, it was a lathe. It would allow the wood to be carved into those intricate little balls and rings and things on the wood, and then they would put the cane on the seat and the back, and this made the chairs much lighter and easier to carry around. So that was one of the things that she brought. She also brought in some lacquer cabinets from Japan or China or India, um, and also cotton cloth that was weaved in India. She brought that. So yeah, she brought quite a few things.
Yes, and I think you mentioned in your book that she caused a bit of a stir by using fork at the dinner table,
Mhm.
which was a surprise to some. And I'm enjoying a lovely cup of tea right now.
Mhm.
So could you tell us anything about that?
I
And
can. In fact,
yeah.
this is really interesting. I just within the last week, I found an academic article about Catherine of Braganza and tea,
Oh,
and there's there's this myth out there that either Catherine brought tea to England, or she did that and she, uh, made it popular to drink tea in the afternoons, and this totally is not true. It's just not true.
oh,
Uh, Tea had been in England since 1620. We have, records of it being there in 1620. And it was very expensive, at that time. Only rich people could afford it. And it was also used for medicinal purposes. And so she probably drank tea for medicinal purposes, along with other noble women at the court. But this article was saying that she did not introduce the social drinking of tea until she moved back to Portugal. So,
wow, that's interesting.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, I hate to burst any bubbles, but that's
No,
true.
that's good. We do like myth busting on this show. That's fine, and I'm very grateful. Um, so yes, a very interesting lady. Now there were many political intrigues during her time as queen, including the Popish plot. Um, and she found herself in some danger as a result, as she was targeted due to her Roman Catholicism. How did she navigate this situation?
She was totally stressed out and got really sick. I mean, it was really horrible. She was accused of trying to poison Charles and kill him so that Jesuits could put his brother James II on the throne, who had recently converted to Catholicism. And so Titus Oates and his buddies came up with all these, just the lies just kept getting weirder and weirder. And when he attacked George Wakeman, who was one of the royal physicians, this was where I think Charles was like, okay, we got to fix this, because innocent people were dying because of all these lies, mostly Catholic noblemen. And so I think she was totally stressed out. But the nice thing was that Charles defended her to the end. And he actually brought her to Windsor Castle. She had kind of retired from court at that time. He brought her back to Windsor Castle and they spent some time together. It was almost like a honeymoon kind of situation. Um, so she did not handle it well, but she was very pleased that Charles stood up for her, and she wrote to her brother and said, I'm totally grateful to Charles for standing up
Yes.
for me.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, you're right that there are so many people so many innocent people were came to bad ends because of this fabricated plot by Oates. One of them, there's a shrine in Shambles in York, and I visit it quite often. It's a shrine largely called the Margaret Clitheroe Shrine, and it also recognizes Thomas Thwing, who is a 17th century martyr who was executed in October of 1680 due to Oates' these fabricated allegations. And so, yeah, it was a very potentially fatal situation for many.
Well, the terrible thing was that there was people in Parliament that wanted to use this plot, and that's why it just kept going on and on and on. They wanted to use it to get Charles to exclude his brother from the throne, to divorce Catherine so that he could have a child with another wife. I mean,
Yes.
this is partly why it kept going on, is because it was used for political purposes.
Yeah. And a reason, no, it was not just because of her being a Roman Catholic, but because by that point she had trouble having a child. And this put a lot of pressure on Charles as well, because people were suggesting that he should divorce her, as you said, and marry someone who would be able to have his children legitimately. So there was a great deal of stress put on her. Now, it was, as I said, very, very difficult for her, especially having to endure the fact that these other women around her were having relations with her husband and getting pregnant quite often. And we have one of them right here. This is Louise, Duchess of Portsmouth. Could you tell me about this lady and what she was and how her relationship with the king impacted Catherine's situation?
Well, this was devastating to Catherine, basically, because Louise came over after Charles's sister Minette died. She was in his sister's household, and so he took her in, and she ended up in the Queen's household working as a chambermaid or whatever. And eventually, she came to Charles's attention, and then that was it. It's my personal opinion. This is probably the one woman that he loved the most of all the mistresses, because he ended up giving her a huge suite of apartments in Westminster Palace, and she basically took over Catherine's duties as queen. Uh, she acted as hostess at banquets and things like this. And Charles would only ask Catherine to come back to court, occasionally for certain things. But Louise took over Catherine's job. And so Catherine retired to Somerset House and was living there on her own. Um, so I don't, another thing is Louise may have been a spy for King Louis XIV of France, because she was from Brittany. And I think that he called on her to spy for him.
Right. And for those who don't know, Louis XIV was Charles II's first cousin. So it's spying on your family. Wow. Yeah, that's something to consider. Wow. When Charles was dying in the winter of 1685, Catherine was completely distraught. She had not stopped loving him throughout all the troubles that they had endured together. So what were her last years and last moments with him like, please?
Oh, it's kind of sad. It's really sad. I think she fainted a couple of times. She just couldn't stay in the room, basically. And both Catherine and her brother, or James's brother, and his wife, Mary Beatrice of Modena, they wanted to be sure that Charles converted to Catholicism on his deathbed. And so they kind of worked behind the scenes to do this. We don't really know exactly whose idea it was, but we can kind of gather from what happened that they did work on that and he did convert. So she was probably pleased about that. But losing her protector was devastating for her. And she did go into depression after he died.
Very sad. And upon Charles's death, his younger brother James, became king. Was she close to James and his wife Mary of Modena?
She was. They actually would visit her on regular occasions at Somerset House. Both of them did. And so she got along quite well with them. This was probably the happiest time of her life because she could practice her faith with no trouble because the two of them were Catholic. So, yes, she was good friends with them. Now, she did start her process to return to Portugal while James was king. And James was very upset with her
Oh,
because
because
he didn't want her to leave.
He took that personally, didn't he? A bit, because he was,
took it
yeah.
personally. Yes,
Right.
and she actually got to the point where she was ready to pack and go, but then she had an illness that kept her there. So she ended up staying even longer than she wanted to.
Right. But things were not so cordial when William and Mary came to the throne, right?
No.
No. So William III was quite Calvinist Protestant, and his wife was Protestant. Could you tell us how bad things were and Catherine's reasons for leaving Britain and moving back to Portugal during their reign, please?
Yes, that relationship soured. I mean, Catherine had been very kind to James's daughters, Mary and Anne, when they were younger, and took them under her wing, and so she loved those two girls. But I think that Mary, once she took the throne from her father, she felt that Catherine had Jacobite sympathies because she was such good friends with her father and his wife. And so she made life really hard for Catherine. Um, and people were, rioting around her chapels, and she actually moved out of London to a small little cottage in Islington and stayed there for a while and only went back to Somerset House to worship occasionally because it was just the whole situation was too fraught. I will say that Mary was totally unkind, but William, he wasn't terrible to her. He
Okay,
wanted
that's
to.
interesting.
Yeah, once she wanted to she needed ships to sail back to Portugal, and so she had to ask William for ships, and he was very amenable to that, and he was kind, and he did give her the ships. So yeah, I don't want to paint him with too bad of a brush. I mean, he wasn't real friendly with her. I think he actually arrested one of her servants and put him in the tower, and it was the person that kept the books during the gambling. Catherine loved to play cards, and they would gamble. She didn't gamble a lot of money, but she did gamble, and so William asked Catherine during a visit, "Why aren't you playing cards?" And she said, "Well, you arrested my banker and put him in the tower."
Oh dear.
Yeah. So he released the servant. So
Right.
yeah.
I'm thinking about all these different connections with all these famous Stuart era people. Catherine had a Lord Chamberlain. Was it Philip Stanhope, Earl of Chesterfield?
Yes.
Yeah, I think he was her Lord Chamberlain, and so you'll read about that in Susan's book. But you may remember that for those who have read my biography, or Ravenous, you'll have found that he's connected to Barbara as well, in that he was her first big love. So first lover. So everything's connected in
Mhm.
this little world. Just thought I'd get that in there, right? um, so when she moved back to Portugal after this unpleasant time under William and Mary, what kind of life did she have in Portugal?
Okay, she was very happy to return. I mean,
Mhm.
she wanted to go back. Her brother wanted her back. The people wanted her back, and so it's one of the extraordinary things about her is that she, left the country where she married and went back home. It doesn't happen that often. Um, and at first, she was kind of a wanderer. She didn't know what to do, where to go. She stayed in several different homes with different noblemen. And then she finally decided to build her own place. And she bought some land, some farmland in Lisbon, and built a palace. But it wasn't really much of a palace. It was more like a farm home, a country state kind of thing. And this is how she had grown up, in the palace of Via Vicosa, which is just west of or east of Lisbon. And so I think she was trying to maybe get back that feeling of living in the countryside. And she kept a very small staff there. Um, there was not a lot of etiquette or, you know, courtly things going on. Um, but what happened was the War of the Spanish Succession broke out, and her brother didn't really want to get involved in it at first. And if he did get involved, he was thinking of going with the French candidate for the Spanish throne. And I think that Catherine might have talked him out of that and going with the Allies, which included England. And so a treaty was signed, and Portugal went to war. And actually, the troops that were used for the war were headquartered in Portugal. So this was a pretty big
Oh,
deal.
yeah,
And her
wow.
brother Pedro had to go off and fight. And so when he did that, his sons were too young and not inexperienced. And so he named his sister Catherine as regent while he was out of fighting.
Wow, that's huge, isn't it?
It's very huge. Um,
Yes.
Madeline Newt, the Portuguese historian, in his biography of the Braganzas, he says that, everything Pedro did was to impress his sister. And I just love that quote.
Oh, that's
And
lovely.
so she was ruling Portugal during wartime, and so she had to make sure that the troops had food and the horses and, kind of a quartermaster kind of thing. And she ruled with a council of men who didn't really appreciate being ruled by a woman, but she managed it really well, and she did her job well. The English commented on how impressed they were with her governance. Well, then her brother came back again from the fighting, and then he had a stroke. And so he named Catherine his regent again. So she served twice as regent. Unfortunately, she became ill herself, in December of 1705, and passed away. So
Oh, wow.
she
But
did
by that
become,
point, yeah,
yeah,
she
she had become
had,
very powerful. She
yes.
also had become very rich at that
Hmm.
point.
Yes, so she really did have an extraordinary life, and it's quite important, I think, not to just for people to not just focus on her time as Charles II's wife, but everything after that as well. Um, and to be a regent twice, that's quite something. Um, so I think that we could call that her legacy. What do you think her legacy is, and what do you admire most about her?
I think, well, I just admire her resilience and
Hmm.
how intrepid she was. And, despite everything, she managed to be this really kind and sweet and nice and loyal, loving person. Um, And I think her legacy is what she did in Portugal. And also, the port of Bombay was part of her marriage treaty.
Mhm.
And Charles ended up leasing that port to the English East India Company. And so
Oh,
this is where the empire in India started, was with that transaction. And this brought the lacquer cabinets, the cane, the cotton cloth, the tea, the porcelain, all of that stuff started flowing into England through the English East India Company. So I kind of feel like that's her legacy too.
yes, I think so. Um, what do you think of the Stuarts of the 17th century in general? And why do you think they're so often ignored?
There was a discussion on Facebook about this recently, and
Oh, yeah?
yeah, and the consensus seems to be, and this is kind of what I find, is that the politics of the Stuart era is complex. And, some people might find it a little bit hard to understand. And you have, like, let's say just the Anglican church. You had high Anglican, you had low Anglican, you had Presbyterians, you had Quakers, you had nonconformists, everything just kind of splintered, and you have all these different factions. And it's the same with the
Right.
politics too. And
Yeah.
so it makes it kind of complicated to teach it and to learn about it. But once you kind of get the handle on it, it's kind of intriguing. Um, and right now, since I'm researching Mary Beatrice of Modena, I'm looking into the Jacobite rebellions that happened after James II went into exile, and for his son James III. And I find that kind of really interesting, how the Scots kept trying to, you know, bring the king back and put them back on the throne.
Yes. Wow. Um, you mentioned Mary of Modena. You've been very busy. You have another book, The Formidable Women Who Shaped Medieval Europe, Power and Patronage at the Burgundian Court, coming out. What is it? Just this month, or
It's
is it?
out in the UK. It's out in
It's
the
already
UK
out.
now.
Okay.
Yeah,
And in the US, it'll be out in,
on
what was,
January 30th, I believe.
wow. So that's something to look forward to. Wow. Um, so I read that you're currently working on your third nonfiction book. Are you at liberty to tell us what that's about, please?
Yes, I'm going to try to recreate the spirit of the Catherine of Braganza biography with
Mhm.
Mary Beatrice of Modena, who was the only Italian queen of England.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That's fantastic. Oh, how exciting. Oh, I love that. Okay. Well, Susan, it's time for one of my favorite parts of Stuart Saturday Live. I would like to talk about your fantasy Stuart dinner party.
Well,
So, who
you
would you
totally
invite?
you stumped me with this question, Andrea. I was like, what?
You could choose anybody from the whole of the Stuart period,
Right.
and
Well,
it's a fantasy, so you can have them. They can be from the beginning or the end or in the middle and all together.
well,
So, who would you invite, and what would you serve, and who would you sit next to? Yeah, I
I
like
would, of course, I would love to speak to Catherine, you
that.
know,
Hmm.
just
Yep.
because I feel like I know her so well after studying her life. But I started thinking about it, and Henrietta Maria was the daughter of King Henri IV of France, as I mentioned,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
man, I would love to talk to her about her dad,
Yeah.
and maybe her brother too, King Louis XIII. I think
Yes.
that would be really interesting to talk to her about that, and also I'd like to talk to Minette, because
Mhm.
apparently she was very charming,
Oh,
and
yes.
yeah, I would love to, like,
Apparently so.
bask in her charm and just see what she was like. And of course, if I do that, I would have to serve French food. I love French food, so I would have a
Yeah.
huge French banquet.
That sounds good. Yes. and who would you sit next to?
I sit next to Henrietta Maria. I think that she's kind of a captivating person. I think
Yes, I
there's been
think
a
so.
lot of bad publicity about her, you know, the propaganda against her. And she
Yes,
seems like
that's
she was a very resilient, like Catherine, very strong, a strong
yeah.
woman.
Yes, I think so. And to have so much upheaval and during the civil wars, and of course what happened to her husband, his execution, that loss, and her children, some of her children dying, and it's awful. But to survive all of that takes a great deal of strength, and I think she was a very strong character. And I think Leander Delisle has done a very good job at bringing her story. Um, I'd say rehabilitating it from the relentless stream of propaganda that happened, particularly during the British Civil Wars. So stuff like that, I think, can really help uh, us understand some of these figures that were perhaps maligned in their time. Um, yeah, that's great. Well, that I really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed our chat. So thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to talk to the audience about the Stuart era or Catherine of Braganza?
Well, I would like to, I think we've talked about this before, is, you
Mm-hmm.
know, the Tudors sort of overshadow the Stuarts, and maybe we need to bring them out of obscurity and, you
Yeah.
know, tell more about them.
Yeah.
I recently read a biography of William III,
Mm-hmm.
and he's very impressive. He's an impressive monarch, impressive
Yeah.
leader. Um,
Yes.
so we need to know about these people.
Yes, definitely. But we're working on it. Yeah.
I'm working
So
on it.
yeah, we are. Yep. And well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I look forward to meeting up with you next time you come to the UK, hopefully. And yeah, we'll have to find another pub, maybe
Mm.
one, near me. I'm right next to Bolsover Castle, so in Derbyshire, and there are quite a few. I mean, we were close to Hardwick Hall and Haddon Hall and Chatsworth, so
Well,
it's
if there's a
all
castle
around there.
there, I'll be there.
Yeah, yeah, you really have to check this one out. It's a Stuart era castle. It's very romantic. Yep. Okay, well, thanks again, and I wish you all the best of luck with your books. I mean, all three of them. This is incredible. Well done, and thank you for being such a positive and supportive person in the history community. It's
Thank you.
very, very great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Andrea. Bye.
Well, that's great. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I really loved speaking with Susan, and it's been too long since we had a chat, so we'll have to not have such a delay in future. But before we go, we have some news. Throughout the year, we've been recording the audiobook of Eleanor Swifthook's book, The Fugitive Sword. And I'm pleased to say it should be out within the next few days. I'll be posting links on my social media when it is available, and we hope you enjoy it. So next month brings us to the end of season 2 of Stuart Saturday Live. And I'll be joined by Jennifer Morag Henderson about Mary Queen of Scots, the Earl of Bothwell, and Jean Gordon, the subjects of her book, Daughters of the North. Until next time, don't forget to keep it Stuart. Goodbye.